We are going to energise the country.
We need to wake up and smell the coffee.
No more Mr. Nice Guy.
Another future's possible, but we've got to fight for it.
Order!
Hello and welcome to the Debated Podcast, the 100th episode of the Debated Podcast. I'm your host, Will, and I'm joined by my co-host, Conrad. And
Hello.
And in this episode, we're going to be discussing what has changed since we started the podcast and what we think will change in the future. So, as to begin with, what do you think has changed since we started the podcast?
Well, I think it'd be a short list to say what hasn't changed. I think. I mean, so much has changed since we started back in 2019. Mm-hmm. So we just had the local elections. We had Theresa May as Prime Minister. We had Brexit was uncertain whether it would happen or not at that stage. The deal had been rejected a few times at that point. So we've seen Brexit. We've seen Boris Johnson winning a big majority. Yeah. Over in America, we've seen Donald Trump lose his re-election bid, which is maybe a change in the other direction towards maybe a more traditional kind of politics, away from the more chaotic, less predictable Donald Trump era. Though obviously he's not going to go away, I don't think. I think he's still going to be a fixture of politics, even if he's not president. He's certainly not admitted defeat yet. So that's changed. And obviously the C word, coronavirus, has obviously changed everyone's lives and changed politics as well.
Mm. Do you think that when we started that we could have anticipated the amount of change that was going to happen by the time we got to 100?
Well, I guess a lot had changed already in the few years before that. Obviously, with the vote for Brexit, the vote for Trump in America, and David Cameron stepping down, that sort of era of politics. It was a more chaotic time. So I think you could have predicted maybe a lot would change, but maybe not quite as much as actually did. That's even more than maybe anyone would have expected.
Yeah, and it seems weird, doesn't it, that when we started, the first episode that we ever did was with Alistair Carmichael. And in that episode, we talked to him about how well the Lib Dems seem to be doing, with the local elections, and the European elections were just about to arrive, of course, which they did very well in as well.
The political system is going to have to find a way of working out how you can accommodate these range of views without corralling people anymore into two big parties. And for us, again, as Liberals and as Liberal Democrats, that's a tremendous opportunity. And that's the one that we've really got to seize this time.
And then looking at the Lib Dems now, they don't seem nearly as buoyant as they did then, do they?
No, I think that's down to one factor, and that's Keir Starmer, really, because as he's sort of a more maybe not in policy-wise more moderate, but in terms of his style of politics and his presentability, he's a more appealing face for those those middle-class voters who sort of went towards the Lib Dems from Labour.
Yeah, and I mean, in our first dozen episodes, Brexit was something that we really talked about. And really, I don't think this year we've talked as much about Brexit. I mean, we have talked about it a bit. Do you think that we're going to be talking about it much more come January? Do you think that with whether we get a deal or no deal, it's going to still be on the horizon?
It's funny because obviously it was a couple of weeks ago when it was some news came out about Brexit negotiations and the talks, and this was just after the US elections, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that British politics still existed and Brexit was still a thing, because I guess it's so easy to get distracted by everything else that's happening that you forget that Brexit has been rumbling along, and we've got the negotiations on the trade deal that seem to be moving slowly in the right direction, but whether there's enough time, I mean, we've only got just over a month now until the end of the transition period, and it's not going to be extended. I can think that's one thing I will predict, is that it's going to end no matter what. So yeah, it's I'm not sure whether we'll get a deal or not. Actually, there's one thing I won't predict how we will leave. I'll predict that we will, but not exactly whether it will be a deal or not. But I mean, today we've just seen, when we're recording this, we've got a rollover deal with Canada. So at least we've got one deal if it's not with the EU.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, thinking back to when we started, the Brexit Party were very much prominent and on the scene. In fact, the second person that we ever did a podcast with was a Brexit Party MEP candidate.
And it's not just that the EU is distant, like physically. It's understanding that institutionally it's so bound up that the people that rule us would rather seek their legitimacy and look for consent, not to their own populations, but to their pals, in other nations. And
the Brexit Party will probably not be as significant in the coming years, but Nigel Farage probably will be. I mean, what do you think is going to be the significance of him going forward in politics?
Well, it's interesting because he's obviously got a big following on it as an individual. And that's how he could make the Brexit Party basically from scratch to win a national election, in a space of a couple months. No other figure in politics could really do that. That's Nigel Farage himself who brought that round. It was, and the fact it was a single issue party on leaving the EU at the time, that's what sort of allowed sort of leavers to gather around it for the European elections. Obviously, when it came to the general election, there's change of leadership. Boris had a deal with the EU that was at least acceptable, if not ideal, for most Eurosceptics, and even Nigel Farage accepted that. That's why he stepped down in all Conservative held seats, and there was a few other seats where they weren't standing, and that kind of took the wind out of their sails, and they didn't do great in the general election. Although I guess by the fact Boris Johnson won and was able to leave the EU, maybe it was overall good for the Eurosceptic cause, if not for the party itself. It'd be interesting to see how they rebrand, because obviously he's going on the anti-lockdown message now. He flirted a bit with the channel migrant stuff, which he did a few videos on YouTube on that got a lot of views. But he seems to be focusing on anti-lockdown as his new message for the renamed party, which is going to be Reform UK. I'm not sure about that name. It sounds too reminiscent of Change UK, which still existed when we started, and doesn't anymore. It's completely wrapped up that now. I think maybe the Freedom Party or something like that would have maybe been a better name, especially going on with the lockdown theme. I'm not sure whether. I think Farage obviously is still always going to be an interesting figure and someone who people are going to look at to see what he's thinking on each issue. And I think he's always going to be a figure in politics. But in terms of like a party winning seats in the same way that UKIP and the Brexit Party did, obviously they didn't win seats in national parliaments, but they gained votes and won them in the European elections. I don't think that this lockdown party will really live up to that, because I think the problem is twofold really. Firstly, it's only really relevant until coronavirus is still existing, and we've got good vaccine news. If by a few months' time it's all back to normal, then what's that? Then it's not really a message to start a brand new party on for 2024. And the second one is the group of people who are most sceptical of lockdowns are younger people, and the group who are most in favour are older people. Traditionally, Nigel Farage has appealed to older voters, and young people haven't really liked him. So it's kind of going against the grain of what his previous support base was. So I don't know how much of that will carry over, if he can maybe win older voters round to being a sort of sceptical of lockdowns, or if he can convince younger voters that he's not an evil racist. I guess you've got to do one or two, if not both of those.
Yeah. I mean, like you mentioned, Change UK still existed when we started, and it doesn't now. When we started, there seemed to be just a complete and utter, fracturing of politics, and like we mentioned, the Lib Dems and the Brexit Party, and things seem to have just in terms of like the usual two-party state that we normally have with the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. Things seems to have gone back to normal. I mean, how long do you think that this is going to stay? Do you think that there is any possibility of any more splinter parties emerging that actually have some sort of like resonance or relevance across the country?
It's funny because, I mean, after the 2017 election, everyone was saying, yeah, two-party politics are back, they're here to stay, because the amount of votes that, Corbyn and May won together was the highest in years that the two parties had won. And then we saw 2019 with after the European elections, and there was about a four-way tie between Labour, Tories, Brexit Party and Lib Dems, everyone on about 25%. And then the actual general election rolled around and all the other smaller parties flopped a bit.
Yeah.
And now we're back at about sort of similar to 2017 levels of support between the two parties. So I think you can never say that it won't happen. I think at the moment it does seem quite sort of polarised and that people will be Labour or Tory, but both parties have got rifts. Boris Johnson, sacking Cummings and stuff. He's lost some of his popularity with Conservative voters. On the other hand, Keir Starmer, with all the stuff that's going on with Jeremy Corbyn spinning in from the party, he's still got a loyal base. Talking about challenges from Ian Lavery and things like that. Whether that will manifest in that way, don't know. But I think there is now space to the left of Labour for a party. Whether one would actually spring up, because traditionally those kind of people have seen their best way is to work through Labour Party and play the long game and try and win it back. So I'm not sure whether you would get a left of Labour sort of fringe party come up, but there is space on the political compass for it now, I think.
And I mean, as we've mentioned before, what's happened with Trump in the US has obviously caused a great deal of divisions there. And when we started, it did seem that there was, a strong possibility that he might be re-elected. And of course, now he's lost, and we're going to be seeing a Biden administration. What do you think, like, the relationship between the UK and the US is going to be like in the next 4-year period, given that we have this shift in the dynamic? Because, I mean, nobody can really sort of like say that Trump and Boris didn't get on fairly well. They seem to get on fairly well. I don't think you can say the same of Boris and Joe Biden.
Well, they've not really had a chance to meet, really. I don't think they've ever met. They've had one phone call now, and it'll be interesting to see where they find common ground. It's interesting you say about Trump looked like he was going to be re-elected. I think if it hadn't been for coronavirus, I think it's pretty safe to say he would have been re-elected. I think his response to coronavirus, did push over, because I mean, although he lost by a fair bit in some states, it would only be like 1 or 2 point shift would be needed to get him re-elected due to the electoral college. So I think he would have won if it hadn't been for coronavirus. Then that would be in a very different sort of scenario, because he did a lot better than a lot of people expected and the polls suggested. I think it will be interesting to see what happens with Biden, because he's obviously he's a very establishment traditional politician. He's not going to be tweeting mad things and stuff like that that's going to inflame stuff. But also, I mean, I'm not a supporter of his kind of sort of politics, so I'm not sure just what kind of impact it's going to have on the world stage, really, because I mean he was always had a foreign policy aspect, and he was chair of the Senate Foreign Policy Committee when he was in the Senate. But I hope he doesn't go back to Obama style foreign policy, because I don't think that was a great success. But it will be interesting to see. I think in terms of relationship with Britain, I think Boris is probably at heart closer to Joe Biden than he is to Trump. I think he, because I mean they're both sort of small L liberals, both concerned with like climate change and stuff like that. I think the Boris Trump being similar thing was. Obviously, there is similarities to their repeal and the voters they won over for the first time with Brexit, but in terms of their actual as individuals, I think they are probably closer between Biden and Boris than it is between Trump and Boris. Because I mean, Joe Biden's not like a far left Democrat. He's going to have to appeal to those people because that's a lot of his support base now. Yeah. But that's not where he's ever been himself as a personality. So. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think it's just going to have to wait and see. But also with the Irish connection, obviously Joe Biden is from Irish stock. Yeah. And obviously the Irish border is going to be an issue with whether we get a deal or not with the EU. And he has criticised Brexit before. So I don't think he would, as president, put his nose in too much. I hope not. But I guess it's just something we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, we will. Just thinking back over the time that we've done the podcast, I know there have been particular moments that I think we've both enjoyed, and speaking to people that we've both particularly enjoyed. I know that we both enjoyed doing the 2019 election debate with Emily Hewitson and George Aylett. That was a very interesting discussion debate. But I mean. Is that, would you say that was your sort of like favourite moment of recording the podcast, or what kind of moments particularly spring to you from doing it, particular guests or particular conversations that you think were interesting or that you really remember?
Yeah, so that certainly was a fun one, and I'd never moderated a debate before, so it was an interesting new thing, but it was interesting to sort of see them hear what they had to say, and sort of so you could hear the sizes and the big issues in the election. Yeah. And it's a bit more grassroots than just hearing what the politicians have to say. These are like activists and members, what their sort of takes on the election was, which was quite interesting.
I believe in, equality of opportunity, and I think leaving the EU will actually bring that for, all immigrants rather than just prioritising those that live within the EU.
Do you want to expand free movement of people then? Because that's surely the sensible option.
No, absolutely not. I think part of leaving the EU is to have a level of control over our borders. And I think the most feasible, realistic and pragmatic solution is an immigrant, is a points-based system where we can, get in the workers that we need. And I think that's the fairest way to put everyone on the same on a level field, and instead of prioritising EU citizens, giving EU citizens priority just because of their nationality, it's absolutely absurd. We get called xenophobic for wanting control over our borders, but I think it's rather than xenophobic to say, oh, if you're an EU national, then it's easier for you to come to the UK.
The solution to that is to expand free movement of people, so you give that
feasible.
Right to more people from. No, of course it's feasible.
Obviously, we have made the news before. So when we had Paul Sweeney on, and he said that he would consider supporting a Ken Clarke-led government of national unity, which again, that sounds crazy now. Like, how ridiculous was that when that was the thing that was discussed? But yeah, and that obviously was brought in Guido Fawkes and the Independent, so that was quite nice, sort of actually sort of break a news story in that way.
You speak about sort of not being willing to compromise to have no deal Brexit, but looking at it on the other side, would you be willing to support someone like Ken Clarke or Harriet Harman, ones that have been suggested, if it was clear that they were very close to forming a majority? I don't personally think they would, but let's say that was the situation.
Yeah. But like you say, I just don't see how practical that proposition is. I think the idea that you'd be able to have some sort of how on earth would you even begin to test that without having a series of runoff votes in Parliament to see what random backbencher could command the majority? It's bizarre. there's no hard and fast way of proving that they were able to command the majority of MPs, which is why I think it was ridiculous to rule out of hand the opportunity for Jeremy Corbyn to do that as leader of the opposition. I mean, if Jeremy was unsuccessful, then I think we'd need to be open-minded about if someone had the chance to do it as a neutral figure, or any figure really that could command that majority. Then we'd need to seriously consider it. I would be ruling it out, and I'd be open-minded to looking at that.
Dominic Frisby, we had him on. He was quite an interesting guest. Obviously, he's a comedian, libertarian activist, and someone who had his eyes on a number one hit, didn't quite make it with a certain song with a rude word in it, 17 million something.
Obviously with comedy songs, you have to sort of disguise it a little bit. If you just start going F off, F off, F off, it's not that funny. And so we had this idea of this sort of long choral, quite mournful opening, which would just be completely undercut by the word F off at the end of it.
I think overall, yeah, there's been a lot of really interesting people that we've had on, and a lot of interesting discussions and debates.
And we're at this is the 100th episode. We're obviously hoping to do this for a bit of a longer stretch. What do you think is going to have happened by the time we reach another 100 episodes? What do you think will have changed?
Well, I mean, who knows? Is it, again, it's so unpredictable these days. I think, so it's going to be another, let's say it's another year and a half.
Yeah.
What's it going to be like then? Hopefully there's no coronavirus, and
hopefully, yeah.
that's long in the past, and rather than it being sort of the impending thing it is now. But it'd be interesting to see actually what sort of society, how it rebuilds, what will go fully back to normal, what doesn't. I think working from home, which a lot of us have been doing, is going to become, not necessarily the norm for everyone, but I think it's going to be more and more common now. People have got used to it, and it's the it's become sort of more prevalent. I think that might not go for, I think people might be doing like half a week in the office, half a week at home, something like that, which will obviously make a big difference in politics, and it's how people deal with that. I think it might be a bit more, I can't predict things like this, but it might be a bit more of a stable time. Because again, once you've left the, you've got, a majority government with a large majority here. America will have a president who's more sort of standard in terms of what they usually are. I'm not sure where, obviously there could be instability still in the Middle East, and that's always seems to be going on. We'll be leading up to the French election 2022. Yeah. I think Macron will probably get re-elected in that. From how it stands now, he seems to have been quite good at sort of unifying France, I think, in terms of and trying to sort of have this French identity, which was a lot of people will sort of think, oh, he's pro-EU, and that's all they see from him. But yeah. I think there's more to him than that, and I think he's done a decent job. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with the US midterms, which obviously, we'll start leading up to those basically as soon as this election finishes. I think it's quite a good Senate map for Republicans, and I think if they don't retain control now, which I think they probably will if they win the Georgia runoffs, then I think they will regain it or expand their majority next time and probably win the House back after their gains this time. So that it will be interesting to see how Joe Biden deals with a fully Republican Congress and see what he can get through after that.
Well, I think there are all things that we're going to look forward to. Thank you for listening to this little 100th episode celebration. Hopefully you'll listen to the next 100 if you've not got too bored with us already. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you've enjoyed it, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, Podbeam and Amazon Music. You can also follow us on Twitter, @DebatedPodcast, like us on Facebook, Debated Podcast, and if you'd like to get in touch with us, whether about appearing on an episode of the podcast or commenting on an episode that you've listened to, you can do so at thedebatedpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. I hope you listen to the next one.